Welcome back. All right, so it's October. Now's a good time to discuss this, I think, as I get ready to do the first power rankings do them before the season. Next Saturday is where I'm aiming to do the first power rankings. And then we can get into that whole discussion after that. But one thing that's changed over the years is my fandom of teams. So for people who don't know, my favorite team is Vancouver. I accept your condolences. Number 2 on the list is Boston. I know that's not supposed to be a thing. I get told regularly it's not a thing. You can't cheer for Boston and Vancouver. How did 2011 happen? How did you feel about 2011? Well, I was rooting for the Canucks because they're number 1 and Boston's number 2. But Boston won, so I was happy for Boston, sad about the Canucks. And then, of course, number 3 is Dallas. And after that, it gets kind of tough. So if I'm looking at this board this year, I'm saying, all right, so who am I really rooting for this year? Part of what's changed is that I watch every game during the regular season. I've not been doing that in the preseason. I don't do that in the preseason. There have been preseasons where I didn't do any previews, any reviews at all. In fact, that's been the case mostly, or it's very brief, or I'll just have the preview video in with the news of the day and just here's who's playing and just move on. This year I'm giving a little more attention because we haven't had a preseason in 2 years, so it feels different and it feels like some sense of normalcy. But in watching every team, you start to find reasons to root for every other team. So right now for number 4, it's Ottawa. If I had to have a number 5, see, I'm leaning towards Florida, but that's where it gets really tough. Because if we're going to go through, and I'll go through each team. So let's say Vancouver, Boston, Dallas, and Ottawa. These are also teams that I can be pretty hard on in videos because that's kind of how that works. When you're a fan of a team, you probably analyze more what they do. Vancouver, for instance, I've talked a lot about Benning and the moves he's made and his general manager acumen when it comes to free agent signings, which has been a problem. But I'm also willing to give him props. So the deals for Pettersson and Hughes are going through. They're not official yet. So I can't really do an official video because if you do that before the deals are announced, and if you're off by $100,000 on what the final number is, people will endlessly comment that you're off by $100,000 on what the final number is. But with Vancouver, it's been 40 years of watching them. Yeah, 40 years. And with Boston, it's been, since Cam Neely got there, and I cheered for Andy Moog, and I loved Ray Bourque. For Dallas, it's been since they were the Minnesota North Stars in 1981. In all honesty, I was a North Stars fan kind of before I was a Canucks fan. So while I watched Canucks games and I cheered for them, I became a big fan of Minnesota when they went to the Stanley Cup Final in 1981. And of course, for Ottawa, the reason for that is that I was born not far from Ottawa. My mother's from that area. I have family in that area. And so when the Ottawa Senators came into the NHL, I really wanted them to do well. And then they won 10 games that year. And it was bad. And it started out beating Montreal. It looked like, well, maybe they'll be okay. No. Their road record was 1 win that year. Didn't they get 1 win on the road? I think they did. So it's been a long time with Ottawa, and I'd like to see them win. Here's the problem. 2011 Stanley Cup was at the expense of these guys. 1999 Stanley Cup for Dallas, of course, was on a controversial goal with Brett Hull's skate in the crease. And Ottawa and Vancouver don't win cups. So, right? But I'm going to go through each team here, and I'll show you how it's difficult. So we'll start with Winnipeg, because I did it in reverse alphabetical, because Winnipeg's usually last. Winnipeg, I'm rooting for them because the way that their playoffs ended was kind of unceremonious, and it's the second year in a row. My wife cheers for Winnipeg as well, and I'd like to see them do well. I'd love to see Connor Hellebuck go on a run. I do like Scheifele. I don't agree with the hit on Evans. I'm fine with the suspension. I know Scheifele wasn't, and it's still a hotly contested item, but I still like Scheifele the player, and I hope that he has a good, clean season because he is one of the most reliable point-per-game producers. Washington. I like Washington, always have, dating back to the 80s. when it was the Gartner, Dennis Maruk era. Don Beaupre being one of my favorites. I have a Beaupre jersey. And so with the Capitals, when they won in 2018, that was great because it was all those decades of falling short and failing finally ending. And so, Ovechkin, one of the most quotable of the hockey players. And I think if somehow a gold medal goes to the Russians, who knows what that might do for Ovechkin the rest of the season. He might be energized from that, and who knows, right? And of course, the chase for Gretzky's record is huge with him. Vegas, I've been to Vegas a few times. We still want to go to Vegas in December. I don't think it's going to happen, but we still, if we have to postpone the trip to Vegas, we're not canceling it altogether, just postponing it. The city of Las Vegas it's beautiful, and the fan base there is better than I think they're given credit for, because the fans in Vegas aren't like, people on the strip, tourists type. The fans in Vegas they're hockey fans. And so when I'm watching games in Vegas and they show the strip, and I'm like, oh, I miss the strip. I miss Vegas and all that. And so I do have a soft spot for the Vegas Golden Knights as a result of the fans that I know that are there, and knowing when Vegas wins, hey, they're having a good night. So if Vegas beats Vancouver, I'm like, well, Vancouver lost, but at least my friends in Vegas are having a good night. So that's one thing. Toronto. So here's the thing. Over the last 4 years, something's happened with Toronto. They've lost so many times in the first round. I want them to get out of the first round desperately. I want to see this team succeed because I think they have good players. And I know there's a lot of complaints about Marner and Nylander over the years too, and now they've changed out their goaltending because Freddie sucked and all that. Not my words, but I've read that, right? I really would like to see Toronto finally succeed. So I think that would be good for them, for the league. I think it would be good in general. And I understand people don't like it because the Toronto media is all over the place. But I don't use the Toronto media argument now as a reason not to like the Toronto Maple Leafs. I did. Especially, 5 years ago. Oh, absolutely. Now, no. But I don't consume as much media as I used to, and I find I try to consume it from as many different, like sports-wise, I consume it from as many different sources as possible. So I don't get as much of the Toronto bent as you might if you're just watching your Canadian sports networks. Tampa, the back-to-back Stanley Cups, I understand that people are, talking about the $18 million over the cap, which is, I've gone over it. I've talked about it in videos. I'm a little bit done with it, but I know some fans aren't. I think it's a good story. 2019, they won so many games, and then they go into the playoffs and they get swept in the first round. And chokers. That's all we heard. And then they won back-to-back cups. So while there's definitely arguments about how valid the cups are and everything, I consider them to be just as valid as any others. And they're not the first controversial cups to be awarded. Not even the first Tampa Cups. 2004 Cup, of course, was when the Calgary Flames believed that they had scored. And there's no definitive angle to say that puck necessarily crossed the line. But anyways, St. Louis, of course, I went on that ride with St. Louis in 2019, which was fun. It was at the expense of the Bruins in the final, but still. St. Louis has knocked out Dallas multiple times. They've knocked out Boston in the final. I don't hate the St. Louis Blues. I don't think that they're a dirty team. I didn't think they were in 2019. I thought that series between them and Boston got kind of ugly, but I didn't think they were a dirty team. I thought it was just two very physical teams amping it up a little bit, and that's when things are going to, you're going to cross that line. Seattle, I would like to see Seattle do well as an expansion team. They're only a few hours away from us when the border's open, but it would be nice to see them succeed. I've had meetups in Seattle. And I was having meetups in Seattle, 3 years ago, I think I had the first meetup in Seattle. And there were people there, and one of the mods from the channel was there, and it was a fun little meetup we had, and then we had another one a year later. And I really want to go down to Seattle again and have one now that they have an NHL team, and especially once this first season in Seattle is done for the Kraken. I would love to go down there, have a meetup, see all the Seattle jerseys out there. I'm sure it would be tough for me to figure, okay, so got to figure out teams for this road hockey game. Everybody's wearing Seattle, except me. Damn it. All right. I don't know. How are we gonna know who's on what team? So that would be a problem, but it's a problem I want to have. So I do hope the team does well. San Jose. I hated San Jose. Couldn't stand San Jose. But while they have some contracts that are a little bit high and the contract length's a little bit long, I don't boo San Jose anymore. That's gone. There's some good young players there. I grew to like guys like Donskoy and Nieto before they moved on from San Jose, and then Nieto went back to San Jose. I do like the Sharks, and I again, part of it may very well be that with the channel, I've met fans of almost every team in person, so then it's kind of like, well, I like them, so now what? Pittsburgh. My hate of Pittsburgh was all the way back to the 90s, and it continued, but it started to change in 2016. Now, this is still when they're down near the bottom of the list in terms of my all-time favorite teams, but Pittsburgh gained my respect in the 2016 playoff run to the Stanley Cup, and then that back-to-back win in 2017 was fantastic. So for me, Pittsburgh, I have a lot of respect for Pittsburgh, and again, you get players you like. I have a Teddy Bluger jersey. I love Bluger. There are a lot of players in Pittsburgh that I like the players, and Pittsburgh seems to like bringing in guys they know I'm a fan of. I think it's a plot. Philadelphia, I've been back and forth on over the years. Didn't like them in the 80s, back in the punchy kind of days, and fans throwing stuff at people, and it was kind of ugly. But I will say that the Philadelphia at this point, I'm rooting for them, because a year ago I thought maybe they'd finally found the key to long-term success, and then they fell off the map again last season. So I'd like to see them bounce back. New York Rangers, hated the Rangers in the 90s. If you had told me back in the 90s, if you had said, hey, so someday you're going to have a John Van Beesbrook jersey, I'd say, I don't think so. But here we are. And the New York Rangers have an exciting young team. I like Artemi Panarin a lot. That contract has turned out to be a pretty good deal for the Rangers, because he is one of the best forwards in the game. Adam Fox, Norris Trophy. I love Shesterkin, love Georgiev. I'm glad they've still got that tandem. Let's see what the Rangers can do. Islanders, I'm a big fan of Barry Trotz. I like teams that can keep a system going. And it's funny, because I talk about how they play like a modern version of a trap style, which some people take as being like an insult. It's not. If you have a team of players that all buy into a style of play, and it's not some kind of a selfish, it's all about me kind of attitude, and with the Islanders it really hasn't been. If you buy into the team motto and the team, aspect of things, you can stick around. You can excel. I have nothing but respect for this team, and Pelech and Pulock are one of the best tandems in the league. So I really, and Mitch Korn, goaltending coach, his work is fantastic. I really do kind of think that the Islanders may surprise everybody and end up winning a Stanley Cup soon here. And it'll be fascinating to see when that happens. They haven't won it since '83, and whether or not that leads to sustained success, right? With Barry Trotz, you just never know. New Jersey. New Jersey now is this exciting young team. I love Sharon Govich. I like Jack Hughes. I've always been a fan of Dougie Hamilton, even though I remember when he left Boston, it was kind of like, if Dougie Hamilton was willing to take a little bit less money, he'd still be in Boston, but he ends up in Calgary, and then he goes to Carolina, and now he's with the Devils. I hope this is his last stop, and I hope he really embraces the team concept too. And I say that as somebody that I'm a big fan of Mackenzie Blackwood. I know people are mad right now because I'm vaccinated. I don't care. I don't. I think that Blackwood's a good goaltender, and I think that what the Devils have built is really good. And right now, of course, with Quinn Hughes signing, there was a lot of, well, Hughes is going to want to play with his brothers. Eventually, yes. I would expect that Quinn would want to play with his brothers. That's just kind of normal. That's a normal thing to want, unless you hate your brother. But, and I've seen siblings that would rather eat dirt than play on the same team. But, yeah, so for the Devils, I do. I like the Devils a lot, and it would be fun to see them stay in the hunt and really show the Metro's tightening up. Nashville. I've gone back and forth on Nashville, which is funny because it's Nashville country. If you know, you know. But for the Preds, that run in 2017 was so much fun to watch, and I really thought they might take out Pittsburgh, and then they didn't. And so with Rene gone now, I'm a big fan of UC Saros. Roman Jossi's one of my favorite defensemen. And again, this is a team that buys into this team aspect, and they roll four lines. They have six defensemen. They're built with defense first, with systems in place, and so I have a lot of respect for that. right? Nashville, I do not hate Nashville. Montreal. Now, Montreal's one of those contentious things, right? So my dad's favorite team was Montreal, one of my favorites being Boston. There were definitely some interesting conversations between the two of us when the playoffs rolled around in the 80s, and every single year Boston and Montreal faced each other. To the point where one year when Boston knocked out Montreal, he didn't come home that night. Wouldn't come home. He knew I had my Boston jersey on and I was waiting for him. I even called him and he wasn't coming home. But and that's related. He knew I was waiting for him. But I love Nick Suzuki. Romanov's a fantastic defenseman. I don't think Carey Price necessarily... Here's the thing with Carey Price. He is one of the best goalies in the league. I don't know that he's the best goalie in the league. He's one of the best. His stats, I think, are more reflective of poor defensive structures in front of him, where there's too many 2-on-1s and 3-on-2s coming at him. But it doesn't make me think that Price is not a good goaltender. He's a very good goaltender, and as he showed in the playoffs, he's capable of going on runs. And I enjoyed that run by the Habs. I did, because I love that kind of chaos where we didn't expect that, right? Minnesota Wild. Minnesota was a team that I didn't like because they played a very boring style of hockey. It was hard to watch. So it would be okay. Vancouver's playing Minnesota. And before I had a channel, I would skip those games. You know, people would say, hey, you going to watch the Canucks game tonight? Who are they playing? Minnesota. No, I don't think so. I think I'll watch, like, video footage of a beach because it's more exciting. Because it's a beach, and that's the Minnesota Wild, and they're really boring. And now that they've got Kaprizov, and I saw even something today about how Cam Talbot's fine with playing a whole bunch of games this year, and I'm thinking, so did Kakinen die, or what happened? But I really like Minnesota's young players. I hope Rossi does well. I like Boldy's resume at least, right? His scouting report was pretty good. So, yeah, I think Minnesota's going to be fun, which brings me to LA. LA is going to be... I really think that LA is going to end up being one of those teams that 2-3 years down the road, we're all talking about, when did these guys get good and why did it happen so fast? When in reality, it probably doesn't. People just aren't paying as much attention to LA now as they're going to, I think, 2 or 3 years from now. There are some very exciting prospects in LA. I do really respect Kopitar. Jonathan Quick was a goaltender that I was praising way before the 2012 Stanley Cup final run and the Stanley Cup win on top of it. And I just thought he was really exciting to watch. Dynamic goaltender and just so much fun. And so the LA Kings, while they've always been down towards the bottom when I do a 1 through 31, I don't dislike the Kings. I really don't. Florida. Florida, you know, honestly would probably be my number 5. I like to root for underdogs, and who better than a team that hasn't won a round since 1996? A team that everybody wants to move, even when I'm talking about Florida, just like, so they're negotiating with Sasha Barkov. They should move that team. They just re-signed Huberdeau. They should just move it. They gave Bobrovsky $10 million a year. That's why Florida needs to move. It doesn't matter what the topic is. It doesn't even have to be about Florida. It could be, so San Jose re-signs Erik Karlsson. This is why the Florida Panthers need to just move. So, yeah. And so I kind of, on some level, kind of feel bad. We'll get to that with Arizona as well. But, yeah, it's hard for me to root against a team that has a pretty good offense. The defense is, I think, now better than they're given credit for. And they just need that consistent goaltending and just that little bit of a push. And I really think they're contenders. Edmonton. Oh, I've had my dislike for Edmonton over the years. But there are some exciting young players for Edmonton. I am a big supporter of Tyler Benson. Really hope that he makes this team. And if he doesn't, that he's the first call-up or that somebody grabs him on waivers. Something like that. Because I think he's good. Now, for Edmonton, they get knocked out in the first round. I know at some point in time, Connor McDavid has to go on a run in the playoffs. He'll drag Leon Draisaitl with him. And the two of them together may very well outscore any problems this team has, which would frustrate people, right? Let's say they go to a Stanley Cup final like Montreal did, and then they fell in that final. Immediately the conversation would come back to, well, once a team shuts down McDavid and Draisaitl, then they're done. Well, yeah, but name a team that if you shut down their two best forwards, they're not done. So as long as the depth is there, I kind of like Edmonton's chances this year, but I'm not cheering against Edmonton. When I watched Edmonton and Seattle the other night, it's not like I was all mad every time Edmonton scored. Connor McDavid is such a remarkable talent, and he's able to just take a game over on a whim. Detroit, I couldn't stand Detroit back in the early 2000s, late 90s. If I'd had a channel back then, nobody would have watched it. Their YouTube video services weren't popular. But Detroit, I will say now, Mickey Redmond makes it hard not to root for them. If you watch the Detroit feed and you get Mickey Redmond, you have endless entertainment. And I like the young players. I love Steve Yzerman's job as a GM so far. I think he's done a good job of putting players together. It's going to take time. But once Detroit is ready to emerge on the other side of this rebuild, I think it could be something special there. And I've found myself cheering for them. Every team on this board, at some point over the last 12 months, they have won a game, and I have cheered. It may be a cheer because it was an emotional victory. It may be a cheer because it was a beautiful goal. But I've cheered. Columbus. What did I say about underdogs? That applies to Columbus as well. And this logo is fantastic. They're not going to make it the full-time logo, so I just use it as often as I can, just to kind of, plant that idea. But Columbus is a tough team not to pull for because they've only won one round in their entire history. And they are the butt of a lot of jokes for that reason. And honestly, a lot of players have chosen to play elsewhere when their contracts are up, which makes it tough to build a contender. I'd like to see them prove people wrong. I think it would be great if they somehow found a way into the playoffs in the Metro. So this is the problem. Because there's only 16 teams that can make the playoffs out of 32. A lot of these teams, I'm saying, it'd be great if they're not going to make it. Can Columbus make it? They could. Because when Panarin and Bobrovsky left and we all expected things to just fall apart, they didn't. They stayed in the hunt. They managed to get into the playoffs the following year. Colorado. I've had a rough go with Colorado on and off. I was mad at Sakic before the Duchesne deal, but ever since the Duchesne deal, he really hasn't made many mistakes at all. I'm trying to think. I mean, I'm sure there's at least a couple, but Colorado's really good at asset management. And now we're up to 20 years since they won a cup. I think they will win one. Nathan McKinnon's been a fantastic player when he's been healthy, and as long as he's healthy all season, and I hope that's the case, Colorado may prove everybody wrong this year like they proved everybody wrong last year. Last season, everybody picked Colorado to win the cup, including yours truly. This year, nobody's picking them to win the Stanley Cup. So is this the year they win it? Because that happened with Washington, too. 2017, everybody, again, myself included, picked Washington to win a cup. And then in 2018, they did, when nobody picked them to win it. So it's interesting how that works. We'll see if Colorado follows that template, if that's even a template. Chicago. Now, Chicago right now, of course, is embroiled in the Brad Aldrich investigation and all of that. On this channel, my job is, I'll report on that. That's important. But in terms of my feelings about the overall organization, I do my best not to allow one to be affected by the other. And of course, we haven't heard the end of that investigation yet. So once that's all done and it's all apparently going to be publicly available, we can then dissect it. But looking over the last 40 years for Chicago, Jonathan Toews has been, the face of this franchise. Now they've got Marc-Andre Fleury. I'm going to be interested to see how it goes. There was a time in, I want to say the early 90s, Chicago was one of my favorite teams. Absolutely one of my favorite teams. Love that team a lot. And they got to a Stanley Cup final against Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh took them out. But there have been times where it's been kind of up and down. For me with Chicago right now, I'd like to see Seth Jones live up to that contract. I've liked Seth Jones over the years, and I understand there are people who don't from an advanced stats perspective. There are some who say he doesn't pass the eye test either. I think Seth Jones is a good defenseman. Do I think he's worth $9.5 million? I think this year's going to tell us. But for Chicago, again, there have been players I haven't necessarily liked, but I can't say that when a Chicago game's on, I'm like, I hope they lose. I don't have that feeling watching any game anymore. It's all smoothed out over the years. Carolina. I've always liked Carolina because they were the Whalers, right? So, and it sort of feeds into that same narrative as Florida, not as much. Notice that getting a good owner and a stable lease in their building and having the attendance go up and getting rid of some of that free attendance as well, I don't hear much about we should move the Carolina Hurricanes. I don't hear it nearly as often as I used to. So I think Carolina's won a lot of people over. Plus, you've got Aho, you've got Teravainen, now they've got Kotkaniemi. This is a team that honestly has a lot of exciting European talent. To go with a guy like Slavin. I love Jacob Slavin. I love Brett Pesce. And I'm surprised they didn't keep Nedeljkovic, but I like Freddie Anderson. I've been a Freddie Anderson fan since before he went to Toronto. There's a video on the channel of the Freddie Anderson trade to Toronto, which is proof that I was a Freddie Anderson supporter. So I'd like to see him bounce back. Calgary. I did not like Calgary at all. Didn't like him at all for a long, long time because as a Canucks fan, it's not allowed. So while I may not be a fan of Calgary in particular, I don't cheer against Calgary either. I know Matthew Tkachuk rubs some people the wrong way. I get a kick out of Tkachuk. I think he has a role, and I think he plays it well. So I like Tkachuk, and I liked his dad too. Speaking of which, I like Brady Tkachuk as well. I understand Brady Tkachuk not being signed is upsetting to Sens fans right now, but it just feels like with that family, it's not that unusual for them to say, this is what we think we deserve, this is what we think we should get paid, and over this term, and that's it. And I can respect that. While fans can get mad at players for holding out, I can respect you saying, I'm worth this much for this long, and I'll wait until I get it. And so, yeah, I don't have a problem with either of the Tkachuks. In Calgary, like Giordano, now Giordano's in Seattle, hope he does well there. But in Calgary now, you've got Markstrom, you've got Tanev. I can't boo Tanev and Markstrom. I'm not going to do that. They got a lot of Canucks there. So, for that reason too, for Calgary, during the 80s, there were times where I really liked Calgary. Because again, there was a free movement between the Canucks and the Flames, even though they were in the same division. Buffalo. Buffalo is proof that when a team is losing that much, you can't hate them. Usually your most hated teams in hockey are your Stanley Cup champions, your teams at the top. The team that just beat your team is usually going to be your most hated team. Buffalo has imploded over the last decade. Buffalo used to be, and again, I'm just saying as a fan dating back to the 80s, Buffalo was a very proud franchise back in the 80s. They may not have been in the finals. They may not have been a team that were seen as like big contenders, but they were always one of the better teams in the league. And there was a lot of stability there. And so what this team has fallen into is sad. I would love to see them turn around. I want to see Mittelstadt. I want to see Dahlin. I want to see these guys make it work. I was really surprised Linus Ullmark didn't end up signing an extension there because they needed that continuity in net. I thought if they were going to make any kind of headway, and this was before we were 100% sure that Eichel was done as a Sabre. But the whole Eichel thing, too, it's just, I'd like to see this get better. It has to get better. So, yeah, I find myself rooting for Buffalo way more than I ever did back in the 80s when they didn't need me rooting for them because they were just the better team. And I mean better team than Vancouver, their expansion brethren, 1970. Arizona, I want to see Arizona do well this year. I'd like to see them as soon as possible state this is where we're playing next year and have all that straightened out and ironed out. I want that done. I want it gone. It's one of those things where when there's something that happens with their building, something that happens with rumors about this and that and Houston and whatever else, that I have to report on the channel, but it doesn't bring me joy. I want to see Arizona stay in Arizona because I think it can work, but you have to have some success on the ice. You have to have good ownership off the ice, good management from that good ownership. And once you have all of that and you start building, the fans will come out. We've seen that in Carolina. The fans will show up when you have everything in the organization stabilized. There is nothing right now happening in Arizona that's going to drag in casual fans, thus going back to the Kachina. They're not the first team. Buffalo last year. We're going to go back to our look. We're back to our old colors. Yeah, the team's really bad, so they try to give you something else. And I'm not saying that it's necessarily done as a distraction, but it doesn't hurt. So they're back to the Kachina. Next up, you have to start building your way back up. When Arizona was first the Coyotes, they were enjoyable to watch. It just sucked because for those of us who wanted them to stay in Winnipeg, it was hard, but they had some good years there. So I find myself hoping that it'll get better. And then last but not least, Anaheim. Anaheim's at the bottom. Anaheim, the thing with them, I do find myself hoping the goals start to come. I like all the young players. I like. Are there some that might be a little bit redundant? Yes. Bob Murray, I think this year has to start addressing that. But they've got a lot of good young forwards. They may want to package up one of those young forwards and maybe a draft pick. Maybe you're at the point where you can pack up a second rounder and get help somewhere else. Maybe you pick up another blue liner. Maybe you get a goaltender who can play more than what you currently have. If Stolarz is going to be your backup, unless Dostal's ready. If Dostal's ready, great. But I'd like to see Anaheim make that headway. And it's weird because, again, as recently as 4 years ago, I couldn't stand the Ducks. But we went to a game in Anaheim, almost 2 years ago now, and I've met Ducks fans, and I find myself saying, you know what? It's hard to hate. The longer this channel's around, the more hockey fans I meet for all the teams on this board, the less likely I am to watch a game after and say, I hate that team won. So it doesn't really happen. So there you go. The THG's favorite teams, I think that's gone by the wayside. I think that you can count on me cheering for these 4 teams this year. If they're against each other, depends on the situation. But again, as the season goes, we'll see what happens. But I'm really glad that I get to watch all these games. I love hockey. And every single team that you see on this board has players I cheer for. So, all right, there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching. Let me know your favorite teams in the comment section below as always. And hey, hit like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. The news board, the sub count thing at the bottom, I know there's some people who don't necessarily like it, but it's only on the news of the day videos. It's not anywhere else. So, and it's a throwback to when the channel first started. So there you go. Thank you guys so much for watching, and hey, I will talk to you again soon.